Imagine a toddler just covered in third-degree burns from a boiling tea kettle, literally fighting for his life in a hospital bed. Like a kid who goes through something so traumatic that he doesn't speak a single word until he's 3 years old.
Oh, wow.
You know,
Yeah.
you wouldn't exactly expect that kid to grow up to be the defining vocal sound of an entire generation. But, well, that is exactly where the polished, kind of untouchable gold medallion image of the BeeGees actually begins.
It's just a profound disconnect, isn't it? Because we tend to view massive cultural icons as if they just, arrived on Earth fully formed.
Right, wearing white suits and singing over a disco beat.
Exactly. But the stack of sources we are analyzing today completely dismantles that illusion. We are looking at this really comprehensive documentary transcript covering their 50-year career, a rather revealing 1973 sit-down with Johnny Carson, and a deeply emotional CBS interview with Barry Gibb at age 70.
And what emerges from those sources, it isn't just some standard music history lesson. It is the ultimate masterclass in professional reinvention.
Absolutely.
I mean, we are talking about navigating catastrophic career missteps, surviving a cultural backlash that would have destroyed almost anyone else, and just enduring unspeakable family tragedy. So the mission of this deep dive is to extract the mechanics of that resilience.
Right, because how does a creative partnership, especially one as complicated as a family business, survive decades of absolute whiplash?
Exactly. There are real survival strategies here that you can apply directly to your own life and career.
Which brings us back to that terrifying origin story you mentioned. Barry Gibb, the eldest brother, surviving those horrific burns at 18 months old.
Yeah.
When you look at the psychological landscape of this family, that event is the bedrock. It instilled this desperate, almost feral resilience in Barry. He became the anchor, like the leader who felt personally responsible for dragging his family through decades of chaos. Because when your baseline for existence is literally surviving the impossible, well, every subsequent career obstacle just looks like a puzzle waiting to be solved.
Okay, let's unpack this because I want to challenge that premise for a second.
Sure.
Trauma doesn't automatically forge a fiercely determined leader. Often it does the exact opposite, right? It creates intense withdrawal, especially considering, he literally didn't speak for a year and a half after the accident. Why did Barry go the other way?
That is the defining question of his character. Instead of retreating inward, he sought control over his environment through constant output. And he pulled his younger brothers, the twins, Robin and Maurice, right along with him.
Right into the chaos.
Basically, yeah. By the time the family relocated to Australia, which, by the way, was partly to keep the boys out of reform school because they were constantly lighting fires and getting into trouble.
Oh, man.
Yeah, so Barry had essentially turned them into a deeply codependent survival unit, and their method of survival was performance. They're absolutely obsessed with making it.
I mean, I understand they had the drive, but how do you actually hone that craft when you're essentially juvenile delinquents hiding out in Australia?
Well, you get incredibly resourceful. They didn't have vocal coaches or fancy studios. The documentary notes that they would actually hunt down specific public toilets on Pitt Street in Sydney just to sing in them.
Wait, really? Public toilet?
Yeah. They figured out that the tile in those specific bathrooms provided this immense acoustic echo, and that really helped them learn to harmonize.
That is amazing.
And then they would perform at local speedways between dirt bike races, literally dodging mud while the crowd threw spare coins at them. It is the absolute definition of putting in your 10,000 hours in the least glamorous way imaginable.
See, I love that detail because if you look at the landscape of fame today, it is so easy for you to get the wrong idea about what success requires.
Oh, completely.
You open your phone and there's a new viral TikTok sensation who seemingly popped up overnight. But that obscures the grueling, unglamorous hustle that usually happens in the dark. But even with all that practice in bathrooms and speedways, how did they actually learn to captivate an audience?
By complete accident, which honestly becomes a recurring theme for them. There's a fantastic story where they were just kids intending to go to a local theater and lip sync to a popular record. Very standard stuff for the time.
Right.
But on the way there, they dropped the record. And back then, records were made of shellac, so they shattered.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So they are standing on stage, their backing track is in pieces, and they are forced to sing live with absolutely no safety net.
And what happened?
The crowd went wild. It was their first true visceral connection with an audience. They realized they didn't need to hide behind a record. They had the goods.
Wow.
And that raw talent gave them the confidence to sail back to England in 1967, right into the epicenter of the musical universe, competing against the Beatles and the Stones.
Which leads to the audition that completely changed their lives. I mean, they had
Yeah.
sent demo tapes all over London, getting zero traction until they landed in front of Robert Stigwood.
Right, the heavyweight manager.
Yeah, partnered with the Beatles' Brian Epstein. But the sources paint a really bizarre picture of this meeting. Stigwood looked like Oscar Wilde, and according to the brothers, he actually dozed off while they were singing for their lives.
Imagine the deflation you'd feel in that room. Just, ugh.
I would be crushed.
But Stigwood wasn't ignoring them. He was listening with his eyes closed. And despite the terrible vibe, he signed them to a 5-year contract that very night.
Wow.
Because he heard a vocal dynamic that literally nobody else in the world possessed.
Right, because it wasn't just three guys singing in unison. It was a very specific blend. You had Barry's soulful R&B-leaning delivery, contrasting with Robin's ethereal, almost fragile vibrato.
Exactly.
And in the middle was Maurice, the fraternal twin to Robin, acting as the harmonic glue.
But it's important to understand the structure of that dynamic. If we look at it structurally, it's like a delicate three-legged stool. Every leg has to bear an equal amount of weight, or the whole thing tips over. And the moment Stigwood launched them and they achieved these massive sudden international hits, the weight distribution fundamentally changed.
Because of the fame.
Yeah. Sudden fame brings a tidal wave of money, girls, and in their case, a heavy reliance on pills and alcohol.
So you take that three-legged stool and you suddenly make one of the legs out of solid gold. The ecosystem collapses.
Yes, perfectly put.
And the breaking point happened in 1969 over something that seems so trivial to us now. Stigwood decided to release a song called 1st of May, where Barry sang lead, and he made it the A-side of the single.
Yep.
And then he relegated a song Robin sang lead on, called Lamplight, to the B-side. Robin was furious, felt it was intentional sabotage, and abruptly quit the band.
This raises an important question, though. Like, why would a letter on a piece of vinyl tear a family apart?
Right, sounds ridiculous.
To understand that, you have to understand the mechanics of the 1960s music industry. The A-side isn't just a label. It dictates everything. It's the only track the radio stations will actually play.
Oh, I see.
It determines who is perceived by the public as the front man. And crucially, it dictates the lion's share of the royalties. Robin wasn't just losing a spot on a record. He felt he was being systematically erased from the band's identity and financial future.
Wow, I didn't realize the stakes were that high.
Yeah.
What makes Robin's reaction make so much more sense.
And psychologically, sudden fame often acts as an emotional freeze frame. Whatever maturity level you have when you become globally famous, you tend to stay locked in that state.
Because nobody says no to you anymore.
Precisely. They were essentially still teenagers in their emotional development, completely lacking the tools to process this intense jealousy. And the press just smelled blood in the water and constantly took quotes out of context to pit them against each other.
So they splinter, they spend over a year apart, do some solo projects that go absolutely nowhere, and eventually realize they need the family unit to survive.
Right.
So they reunite. But by the early 70s, they hit a massive brick wall. The musical landscape shifts dramatically toward hard rock. You know, Led Zeppelin, The Who, and the BeeGees' orchestral pop sound is suddenly viewed as hopelessly outdated.
It was a complete crisis of relevance. They were losing the one thing that had sustained them since those public bathrooms in Sydney, which was their connection to the audience.
Yeah, and I found a detail from that 1973 Johnny Carson interview source that perfectly captures this feeling. They were sitting on a couch with Johnny, and they admit, with this quiet frustration, that they're playing these massive 15,000-seat stadiums, but they can see from the stage that only about 3,000 people are actually paying attention.
Oh, that's brutal.
Right. The rest of the arena is just carrying on their own conversations, buying hot dogs, totally checked out.
That is a terminal diagnosis for a performing artist. That loss of intimacy, well, it forces a massive pivot. Out of pure desperation, Stigwood suggests they completely relocate. So they go to Miami, to Criteria Studios, and pair up with an R&B producer. They are geographically and musically entirely out of their element.
But I have to ask, I mean, how do you just manufacture a totally new, credible R&B sound out of thin air when you are three white pop singers from England?
You don't manufacture it. You stay open enough to let it happen to you. While in Miami, they drove back and forth to the studio every night over this rickety bridge.
Okay.
And the tires going over the metal grating made this specific syncopated rhythm, like thump, 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 thump. Barry starts muttering a melody over the rhythm of the bridge, and that completely accidental mechanical noise becomes the foundational groove for jive talking.
Oh, wow. And here's where it gets really interesting. Jive talking gives them the groove, but the defining characteristic of their entire second act was discovered through another accident.
Oh, the falsetto.
Yes. They were working on a track called Nights on Broadway, and the producer simply asked Barry if he could do some ad-lib vocals to fade out the end of the song. So Barry steps up to the mic, decides to experiment, and pushes his voice up into this piercing, incredibly powerful falsetto.
It's just out of nowhere.
Exactly. He didn't practice it for months. He just tried something weird to see what would happen.
And the mechanics of why that falsetto works so brilliantly are fascinating. If you are producing an R&B or funk track, the bass line and the kick drum are incredibly heavy and dense.
Right, taking up all the low end.
Exactly. So if you sing a traditional mid-range pop vocal over that, the sound gets muddy. The voice just gets lost in the instruments. By pushing his vocal into the stratosphere with that falsetto, Barry created frequency separation.
Oh, that makes sense.
His voice sat perfectly on top of the heavy groove, cutting right through the mix. It was a structural revelation that seamlessly synthesized white pop melodies with deep soul grooves.
That is brilliant.
Yeah.
I never thought about it as a frequency solution. And that pivot, well, it sets the stage for the most famous era of their lives. It's 1977. Stigwood calls them up. He's producing a low-budget, gritty movie based on a magazine article about a guy working in a Brooklyn paint shop who goes dancing on weekends.
Right. Saturday Night Fever.
Yeah, and he asks him to write a few songs.
Keep in mind, they are in France at this moment, deep into recording their own studio album. This movie request is a massive interruption.
Exactly. And this is where the BeeGees absolutely dismantle the modern concept of creative blocks that we hear so much about today.
Yeah.
If you are struggling with a project right now, listen to this. They didn't read the script for Saturday Night Fever.
Yep.
They didn't agonize over the protagonist's inner emotional journey. They just took the incredible R&B momentum they were already writing, applied it to the vague concept Stigwood gave them, and cranked out How Deep Is Your Love, Stayin' Alive, and Night Fever over a single weekend. Pure, unbothered execution.
And that unbothered execution reshaped global culture. The Saturday Night Fever soundtrack sells tens of millions of copies. By March of 1978, the Brothers Gibb held 5 of the top 10 spots on the Billboard Hot 100 chart simultaneously.
Absolute domination. But, you know, the higher you climb, the further you fall. Absolute saturation bred absolute contempt.
It really did.
People couldn't escape them, and the culture violently turned. In July 1979, at Comiskey Park in Chicago, a radio station hosted Disco Demolition Night. Fans literally brought tens of thousands of disco records, mostly BeeGees records, and blew them up in a bonfire on the baseball field.
Just a total rejection.
Yeah, it was an outright aggressive rejection of everything they stood for. They were blacklisted from American radio overnight.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is the inherent danger of allowing yourself to become the avatar of a cultural zeitgeist. The zeitgeist always, inevitably, moves on. When society decided it was done with disco, they were done with the BeeGees.
So how do you survive that? When the entire industry decides you are toxic, how do you not just pack it up and retire?
You step behind the curtain, their childhood resilience kicked in again. Instead of fighting a losing battle against public opinion, they recognized that their core talent wasn't wearing white suits, it was songwriting.
Right.
They quietly pivoted to ghostwriting and producing for other established artists.
And the way they did this was genius. They didn't just hand over sheet music. Barry would record full demo tracks, singing in his falsetto, to imitate the female artists they were writing for, creating a perfect vocal blueprint.
That is so clever.
They wrote Barbra Streisand's entire Guilty album. They wrote Dionne Warwick's Heartbreaker. They wrote Dolly Parton and Kenny Rogers' Islands in the Stream. They were completely bypassing the radio blacklist.
Yeah, they were still dominating the charts. Their faces just weren't on the album covers.
So they figured out how to survive the professional graveyard. They outsmarted the industry. But what the sources reveal is that while they were meticulously managing this massive professional machine, that same machine eventually consumed their family. We have to talk about the tragedy of the fourth BG, Andy Gibb.
Andy was the youngest brother, born over a decade after Barry. And he absolutely idolized his older siblings.
You see this dynamic so clearly in that 1973 Carson interview. There's this endearing moment where they are joking with Johnny about Andy. He's 15 at the time, traveling with them on tour and telling all the girls he's 18.
Classic younger brother move.
Exactly. And Andy had the talent to back up his ambition. Barry takes him under his wing, produces his records, and Andy makes music history. He becomes the first solo artist ever to have his first 3 singles go straight to #1 on the U.S. charts. He is a global teen idol.
But imagine a psychological pressure cooker he was living in. You achieve your wildest dreams, but you are constantly plagued by the insecurity that you only got there because your older brother handed you the song.
Yeah, the imposter syndrome would be unbearable.
You were standing in the shadow of giants, desperately trying to prove your own autonomous worth.
And Andy simply couldn't bear that weight. He sought an escape, and he descended into severe cocaine abuse. It unraveled his life with terrifying speed.
It really did.
He started missing tapings for the national TV show he hosted, Solid Gold. He was fired from a Broadway production, and it destroyed his relationship with actress Victoria Principal. The source material notes she finally gave him a devastating ultimatum. It's me or the drugs. The grip of the addiction was so absolute he couldn't choose her.
He did try to fight it, though. He eventually went through rehab at the Betty Ford Center and got clean. He was really trying to mount a comeback. But the biological toll that years of severe cocaine abuse takes on the human body is, unfortunately, often irreversible.
And this is where we need to correct the historical record, because the tabloids gleefully printed that he died of a drug overdose in 1988 at age 30. But the sources are clear. He died of myocarditis. How does that actually happen?
It is a devastating mechanical failure of the body. Chronic, heavy cocaine use severely degrades and weakens the heart muscle over time. Because his heart was fundamentally compromised by his past addiction, when Andy contracted a simple viral infection, something a healthy 30-year-old would easily fight off, it triggered severe inflammation in his heart. His weakened system simply gave out.
Which raises an incredibly complex question, like, how does a family system survive when it is so deeply intertwined with business and then is shattered by such profound public loss? The collateral damage must have been immense.
It broke them. Barry carried an agonizing amount of guilt because his final interaction with Andy was a tough love phone call.
Oh, man.
Yeah, he lost his temper with him rather than being gentle, and he had to carry that regret for the rest of his life. Barry also began suffering from crippling back issues that left him in pure agony during their later tours, literally forcing him to hit those high notes through sheer physical grit.
That sounds miserable.
And meanwhile, Maurice, the peacemaker, found himself fighting an ongoing brutal battle with severe alcoholism, triggered in large part by the unresolvable grief of losing Andy.
They were broken men, standing on stage, continuing to sing perfectly harmonized pop songs about mending broken hearts.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the final source, and really the emotional core of this entire analysis. Fast forward to the present day. Barry Gibb is 70 years old, sitting down for a reflective interview with CBS. And he is sitting there alone.
Right.
He lost Maurice suddenly in 2003, and then Robin after a grueling battle of cancer in 2012. Barry is the last surviving brother.
What's fascinating here is the sheer amount of time it required for Barry to process the reality of being the sole survivor. In the interview, he admits it took him a full decade after losing his brothers to finally find a baseline sense of contentment.
A whole decade.
Yeah. He had to consciously, actively make the decision to let go of all the old resentments. He had to forgive the sibling rivalry, the A-sides versus B-sides, the ego clashes that defined so much of their early career. Because when you are the only one left, there is no one left to argue with. The competition is over, and all you are left with is the silence.
He said something to the interviewer that just stopped you in your tracks. He said that now, sometimes when he is performing alone, he can hear his brother's voices even louder on stage than when they were actually alive. The harmony is permanently woven into his DNA.
That is just beautiful.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? The legacy of the BeeGees is infinitely bigger than a disco beat or a white suit. It is a brilliant roadmap for surviving the brutal roller coaster of professional relevance. It teaches you to lean aggressively into your core talents when the industry turns its back on you. It teaches you the profound humility required to know when to step back from the spotlight and let your work speak through others. And most importantly, it highlights the absolute necessity of preserving your personal relationships above your ego, because eventually the applause will always stop.
It is the ultimate reminder that the work you do is important, but the people you do the work with are irreplaceable. The friction of collaboration is what creates the creative spark. But if you let that friction turn into a fire, it will burn down the whole house.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over today. Think about a lingering professional or personal rivalry in your own life right now. Maybe it's a colleague you are constantly trying to outdo, a friend you secretly measure yourself against, or even a sibling.
We all have one.
Right. If everything vanished tomorrow, the project, the status, the very person you are competing with, would you wish you had spent less time fighting over who gets to sing the lead and more time appreciating the harmony you were creating together?